welcome to another Hire Navigate Your Job Search show. I'm your host, George Murray, and each week we try to bring up a topic that's relevant to help people who are either new to job transition or also struggling. We ask to try to get a subject matter expert on, which we have today, to answer some of the questions, and also ask for the people that are watching the show live on Facebook Live and YouTube Live to ask questions through the chat, and we'll try to answer as many as we can. And then by Saturday, we upload this to all the podcast platforms. I think there's a total of 14, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Excited today because an option is always, looking at all options when we're in job transition, especially the last couple of years, a lot of people have really had an opportunity to take a time out, look at where they're at in their career path of life. And I can tell you that coaching and helping a lot of people, what they've been doing 10, 15, 20 years ago, they're kind of like, you know what? I'm not really excited about doing that anymore. So this episode today, we're going to be talking about entrepreneurship, what it takes to make the jump. And so we're going to bring on Michael W. Wright. He's a former global technology executive at scale. He was a president of Entegris, who is here in Minneapolis, for those people watching in Minneapolis area or listening on our podcast. He's also a futurist, author, and strategic advisor. Over his decades, he has held board, C-suite leadership roles spanning startups to public companies and academia. Former senior fellow, advisory board chairman of TLI, and adjunct professor at Carlson. And I just saw a couple of his YouTube shows that he was talking to a lot of great people. So after this, I would definitely encourage you guys to reach out and check it all out. Michael is focused on convergence of exponential technologies, value-driven leadership, and building high-performance organizations to thrive in an area of accelerated change. And if anybody has been paying attention on outside the four walls that they live and work in, there has been a lot of change, especially the last couple of years. His most recent book, The Exponential Era, that's published through Wiley, examines the trends and strategies for a world transformed by rapid, accelerated technology advances. So I want to welcome to the show, Michael.
Hi, George.
How are you, sir?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Hey, did I miss anything? Do you want to kind of tell a little bit more about, just who Michael is, and before we kind of dive into some of these questions?
Well, I don't have time to start out the usual story. I started out as a child, but I think there's some things in there that probably are maybe of interest to your viewers, in the sense that I've done this a couple of times where you're in a job situation and either it changes or you changes. I always used to like to say, I never left the company. There have been companies that left me. Mm-hmm. So it's one of those where you find yourself either opportunistically or sometimes out of necessity trying to figure out, how do I, move on from here? And I think that's, a little bit what you wanted to get at. And I think there's a couple of different ways to play entrepreneur. I'd say also on the rapid change side during COVID, it's one of the things that we did was write a book, because COVID didn't change your observational powers. If anything, it enhanced them, give you a chance to look at how things were going and reflect back. So one of the things that I spent most of my career in high tech, all the way back to, I don't want to date myself too much, but we were the part of the largest clean room manufacturer in the world. We built Intel's fabs 1 through 9, that type of thing. So what you learned to experience was the exponential curve, Moore's law, which is the ultimate curve, and then have that be sort of your guideline of rapid change. And what you learned is if you couldn't stay on that curve, you were out of business. If you didn't make the next node, there was just no business for you. So it really changed kind of your thinking of, how fast do I need to move? What do I need to pay attention to? But what we're seeing today is that Moore's law, which is the inverse of that, is computing power. So as you come down Moore's law, things get smaller, things get faster on the other side of that. And when you look at a curve like that, it does this, right? It's not a nice linear, it moves like this. So that's why you're seeing all of a sudden, well, where did AI come from? It wasn't here 5 years ago. Well, it was sort of, but it was part of that exponential curve. And then as the computing power comes up, boom. So I would say that's sort of a better history of where I've been and where I'm coming from.
No, as a matter of fact, my first book actually came out during COVID. And, it was ironically for job transition. It's best practices of all the people I met, wonderful people in all kind of the best areas. And I just recently went through a transition. So I know it's tough out there for folks, but successfully found a job and left in 11 weeks, right? Where people are still struggling 7, 12 weeks. You can't continue to do the same thing expecting different results. You've got to take stock in what you're doing and finding out what's working, what's not working, which I always say, and I'm sure you'll agree as well as a lot of others who've been down this road before, networking should be a great big piece. It's not just sitting behind a computer and submitting resumes. So, and I'm sure we got technology discussion. We could talk for days on that.
Yeah. The networking piece, I think, is critical. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I kind of want to jump in, and kind of start asking, can you share the journey from being the employee to being an entrepreneur and what inspired you to take the leap into entrepreneurship? Because I know that a lot of people are contemplating it, but they're like, okay, will my parachute open if I jump out of corporate America? I know I say that a lot of times, right?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. You can find yourself in transition. Sometimes, again, I call them rug pulls. They're situations you didn't see coming, or things happen that, some of the financial people call them externalities. And that is going to happen to you at some point. The idea of the 40-year career with one company anymore is obviously not the case. So you are going to find yourself in transition. The issue becomes, where are you, and have you accomplished what you want in that vein? Or sometimes it's an entire technology shift and there just isn't any path. So you've got to create a new one. I would say the other thing that I have helped some people with is to do a skills inventory. What are you good at? Because that sets more of a foundational piece. I've always been accused of looking around the corner. Well, okay. How do you apply that skill? What do you do with it? How do you capture it? There are people that I've helped that have been in the military, and they go, well, I was just a gunner in a helicopter. Oh, really? You're great under pressure. You're quick thinking. You're a survivalist. You start looking at your skill set differently. You have a huge set of skill sets that are desirable by somebody,
Right.
Yeah. And I think that's sort of that's, again, a way to look at it is what are your skill sets? Where might they apply? And don't sell yourself short.
And for those people who have been in the military, including myself, I tell people, after you've been shot at, everything is easy. There's no reason to stress out and everything else, which people tend to do when the stress and the pressure comes on them. What are some of the biggest challenges you've faced when starting your own business, and how did you overcome them? Any lessons or jobs for the job seekers can apply to their own journey? Because obviously there's probably a good 10% that say, I'd like to do it, I just don't know how to do it. What forced you? What pushed you? I mean, and that kind of leads into my third book that I'm currently working right now, is the fearless path, right? How to overcome your biggest fears. Entrepreneurship is a big jump, right? There's a lot of unknowns, more unknowns than just going back and getting W-2.
I think it also depends. It's a little bit age dependent, somewhat, and experience, maturity. I think there's what you have to be prepared to do. So I'm ex-military as well. You're military. One of the things that the military does a very good job of is push you to the point. A lot of people go, oh, they just try and make you fail. They just beat up on you. No, that's not the point. The point is for you to find out where your limit is.
Right.
So, a simple example is, so for many of your viewers, if I was to come up to you and say, how many push-ups can you do? Well, I do 50. Great. Give me 75 now. Right now. Now in the military, I can create that circumstance where you've got to push. And you might find yourself doing 80. You might stop at 72, but I guarantee you one thing, you're going to go past 50.
Yep.
Right? Because I was able to. So in the entrepreneurial world, you've got to be prepared to find out where those limits are and be okay with pushing that, because you're going to have the ups and downs. You're going to have the build outs. When we built, so I'm really going to age myself here, but when we built wwk.com, so 3-letter acronym, you can guess how early we were. Our first website was 92, but we built all of the cost of ownership software models for the semiconductor industry. Well, that wasn't just an easy journey. That wasn't just, I walked out of General Signal and GCA and, went over and got a contract with DARPA or whatever. That took months of trying to pick up consulting jobs here and there while we're trying to get, the contract, et cetera, et cetera. I slept in my buddy's front room. I worked in his insurance office in one of his spare offices. I tapped out my credit cards at one point. But I believed in what we were doing. I knew we had a path to success, and 30 plus years later, it's still out there, and it still does most of the cost modeling and occasionally models things like jet engines for Boeing and a few other things. But that's what it takes.
Right.
No, but don't be afraid of it. Don't be afraid of it. That's just, again, you can do more than 50 push-ups.
Right. No, and I agree, and that's why there's so few that actually take that, because for the majority, it's like, I want to get comfortable again, right? If you can get comfortable being uncomfortable, you can set yourself apart differently. And I got a little short story. When I was in basic training, of course, I was like that, they drop you everywhere and you've done everything wrong, right? And I'm sitting there pushing up and it's pouring rain. We just did a 26-mile road march and we got all our rock stuff on it. And I was literally at the point, I'm like, okay, I've done so many push-ups and I just couldn't do anymore. And I guess the drill sergeant behind me, one most inspiring, everybody always thinks of Full Metal Jacket. They're yelling, they're screaming, and they do, right? And they do a lot more, at least back when we were, right? They basically just beat us to a pulp. But I remember this like it was yesterday. He came right in back of me and he said, embrace the suck. He says, if you let it in, he says, it will consume you. He says, but if you close it down and you turn around and do the best you can and just hold steady, he says, this too shall pass. And I was just like, that was probably one of the most inspiring things I've ever heard since, being 18 years old, right? So what key skills and qualities do you think are essential for some transitioning from job search into entrepreneurship? We talked a little bit about it, but what do you think are maybe the deciding factors from the 100 people versus the 2 or 3 that are going to make the jump and successful?
I think there's again, it's an inventory of your skills and playing to those, and then recognizing what you don't know and where you need help. Unless you've been a CFO, you're not going to be the best financial guy on your team. Right. Unless you've been carrying a kit bag for, a couple decades, you're not going to be the best sales guy. Unless you've got a PhD in the domain that you're playing with in technology, it's unlikely you're going to know enough.
Right.
So it's surrounding yourself with people. Now you can't always afford them. It depends on when we say entrepreneur and startup, that takes, everything from a single person to, I put a team together and I got capital and whatever else. All of those things, I think, just being aware of your own limitations, being aware of what you need, and not wasting time trying to figure it out yourself. Go get the help. Right. You can sit down and you can learn Wix to build your website. If you've got the time and you've got the background and all that, that's great. But you might be better off going out and having 3 or 4 coffees with people that, can really do something for where you want to go with your business. Absolutely. And getting somebody else to do your website. But again, those are just subtleties. The other thing is just to have a belief in yourself and a belief in what you're doing. Because if you don't have that, it's going to be very, very gut wrenching, and it'll be there'll be a lot of pressure on you that you didn't need to take on. I mean, I've scrambled in my life, done the 2 jobs and, all that good stuff. So
Yeah, you do
it's
what it
it's
takes.
there, but my grandmother, always said tomorrow's another day, and there's something you can do.
No, I agree. What advice would you give job seekers who are thinking about launching their own business? How can they effectively balance their current job, maybe, with an entrepreneurship aspiration?
Well, that's very interesting. That's the old, where's your bag and is it packed?
Right.
Sometimes when you start thinking that, I mean, I was always the type that, if I go in 100%. I just shut down. I'm there. If you're at that point where you're kind of going, well, maybe I ought to start looking to put this together, or I've got this passion and I'm going to use my job. I'm going to still do a good job at my job, but I'm going to start exploring this because that's what I'd really like to do. So there's a great expression: never run from, always run to. Right. And I would say for entrepreneurs, that's a very critical path. If you're running from your job and you're just going to chase the green pasture of to, where, I'll just go be an entrepreneur, your odds just went down.
No,
right?
agreed.
You have to run to it. You have to say, that's where I want to go to. That's who I want to become. That's what I want to accomplish. Because if it's just, I can't stand this place, I want to get out of here, well, then just look for another,
Yeah, that's not a good
gig.
reason.
It'll set you up for failure. But
I mean, I'm sure you've met a lot of them too. The ones that I've met, at least have a vision. They're like, hey, I want to make an impact. I want to do something, to change the world, the Elon Musk and everything else. And they do the things that most people won't do, right? They'll basically sleep in their own shop for, 2 years before getting it launched out of the ground or whatever. And those are the things that separate the entrepreneurs from the rest of the cavalry, right? Is that, hey, they're willing to put in the extra. They know the pain that needs to happen. I mean, a lot of the ones that, I worked for a company, a German RFID company, and the owner, I asked him, I said, did you ever think this company was going to get 200 million? And he's like, George, I never thought I was going to get 20 million. He says the first company didn't go so well. He says, and it was out, right? He says, and that was a big pain point. He goes, but I do believe I had technology that needed in the market. And then before you know it, that 200 million after a couple of years working there became 500 million, right? It's just, they had the determination. To your point, they surrounded themselves with experts in the particular areas that they weren't familiar with, but they were great at putting great people together to turn around and serve something bigger than themselves. And that's what the military is all about. I tell people, if you can develop an organization where you can get people from all walks of life, financially, whatever the case may be, and raise their hand and commit to giving their lives to support somebody else's decision. I mean, what kind of culture would you have? What kind of capabilities in your organization would you have, right? But the only people that do it is the military, right?
Yeah, I think, I've done it a couple times, not at that level. I would never even make that comparison, but very close, because you take that, but you build teams, you build people. That's one thing I also figured out. When you're going to build a company, you start with building people. Right. And so you start to look at your people, and there's something called the 4 C's. And it was a really good way for me to sort of gauge, and especially as you're building a company, who am I going to bring in? What's going to be the criteria? Because you can start with one thing right away, and that's character. So that's the first C. If they don't have character, you're going to have challenges no matter where you put them.
Yeah.
So first of all, character. The second one is competence. They can do the job. They're an engineer. They've got their stuff. You can test that a couple different ways, but most of the time people don't mess with you too much on that. They can really do the job, or they wouldn't have showed up. The third one is commitment. Now that's a tougher one. How committed are they? Especially in a startup, because you're taking other people's money. usually, unless you're finding it yourself, and then that's maybe closer to home. But the issue there is you have a fiduciary responsibility now. You've told certain people you're going to put your energy into this and you're going to make this happen. And not only are you going to protect their money and spend it well, you're actually going to return something.
Right.
So when you bring that person in and you look at that commitment, that's part of what you got to look at is when the lights go out in the alley, who do you want at your back?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And if you can't look around the room and answer that with everybody in the room, you've got somebody that shouldn't be there. And it's only a matter of time before, you're going to have that issue. So you have character, you have competence, you have commitment. And another way to measure commitment is another thing. So I grew up in the restaurant business with my grandparents, right? And so you learn to hustle a little bit.
Oh, yes.
But my grandfather, with the other side of it, would always say, when you sweep the floor, sweep the floor.
Yeah.
And it took me a long time to figure that out.
Right.
However, when you come back to that commitment C, I would much rather take somebody off of the floor who's absolutely focused, doing their job, cares about it, is committed to it, no matter what it is. I don't care if it's putting a nut on a bolt. I'd rather take that person and put the energy into training them and making them part of a successful team, right? Than the person that comes in and goes, yeah, well, I got to go do this and I got to go do that. And I'm sorry, I don't have time for that. The fourth one is chemistry, right? You bring them in and now you've got to have something that we all got to play together. A lot of people misread that. So it's unfortunate, but most people will never experience sculling, rowing.
Mm-hmm.
If you do multiple man rowing, it isn't just a matter of everybody doing to the drum.
Right.
It's the exact same pressure, the exact same depth, the exact same motion. It is really synchronous, right? Because that's what gets that thing up out of the water and moving. It isn't Fred's rowing faster than Sally or John's, stronger than Fred. It's a coordinated effort. That is chemistry. When you have chemistry, it's a little like, I always like the basketball analogy, right? Who's the open guy? Right? Get him the ball. And when you have a very good team and you do those 4 C's, then I think you can do great things.
Oh, that's great. I love that. Right in the middle of the conversation, we talked about finances, which led me right into the next question. Many job seekers may have limited financial resources. How did you secure funding or bootstrapping your business at the onset? And what tips can you offer others in a similar position?
Okay, well, I think this is a good crossover point for entrepreneurship.
Right. And we were talking about that just before we got on the call.
Yeah. So there's the entrepreneur, then there's the entrepreneur. And, these are people that have ideas for the company that really have merit. Sometimes whole new products develop out of it. Post-it notes is a great entrepreneurship story, right? Because of what they did and how they did it.
Yeah.
And Entegris is an example. I saw that fuel cells were going to do something. So this is a long time ago because it's about 2003, 2004. And we started to get involved in it. I had a really good engineering executive that I thought would grab onto this. And in fact, he started the conversation up to a certain extent. We said, we know it's a long time away, but if we get in it now, just like we learned in the semiconductor industry. So in the semiconductor industry, when you make a change in a wafer size, it can take 10, 12 years. Right. But if you don't start at the first year, you will not be there at the 12th year when it switches, right? You won't have the product, you won't have have participated in the standards, et cetera. So anyway, back to the fuel cells thing. The issue is more finding that internal champion, but then making it truly like I'm going to give you money. I'm going to find money. You're going to build a team, and you're going to go build this division. You're going to make this into something and make it happen. And that is entrepreneurship, and it's a great experience. You've got to assemble your team. You've got to run to a budget. You've got to be responsible for the money and the outcomes. You've got to forecast. You've got to do all kinds of things. It's also a path to leadership, obviously.
Right. No, I agree.
By the way, but it did about $3 million, I think, when I left, and I think it's it's in the hundreds of millions of dollars now.
Yeah. I mean, that's also
Takes a while.
This vision, the visionary, right? Being able to see that, right?
See around the corner. Yep.
Yeah, be able to see that out there. I tell people all the time, the CEO's job is they're out 3 years and 5 years. They see how wonderful and beautiful it is. The people day to day don't. And the chief operating officer's responsibility is to build that roadmap to that vision, right? And then people get there and they're like, get them all the tools that they need in order to be successful. Make sure it can sustain that growth pattern and build pace so that you can be first to market in this situation.
Yeah, that brings up an interesting point about what's required of the entrepreneur, as well as I think senior executives. So there's two aspects to that. One is you're always short-term thinking, but you're also long-term thinking. You're always doing this, what's coming, what do I have to adjust to, how's my vision developing, and, traction, and all the different things you have to put in place. And then there's, oh, geez, we're going to run out of money by Friday. Now what, right? Payroll. Oh, that funny thing. So I think there's that, juxtaposition. The other is the seniority of your thinking. And I won't say the seniority of the person. That's a different thing. So two very influential people in my life. One was Japanese, president of, I won't say who, but a Keiretsu level company. And we were talking one night about leadership, and he said, I can always tell the seniority of a leader by the time horizon in which he thinks. That's a very interesting perspective.
Yeah.
Right? So if you're running a multi-billion-dollar Asian company that has a history, you would think, yeah, okay, 10, 12 years. Oh, no. 50 to 75 years was his horizon. Right? Now, he knew there was a lot of different things and a lot of different paths that Cone of the future could take, but he was thinking about them and thinking about how it all play out. The other one I can name was Jim Rainier, who was the former chairman CEO of Honeywell, and got involved with the Technological Leadership Institute at the U because he started it. But Jim talked about range. So this gets back about surrounding yourself. And somebody wrote a book about it recently. And it was like, oh, yeah, nice. It was, thought of a long time ago.
Sure.
But if you think about the different roles that people have in a company, you have R&D folks who it's just next thing. They want to keep playing and go with different things, and that's their job. Find out what might work, test, experiment, do all that sort of thing. Then you've got your operating people, and say like your COO or your factory managers or whatever. Mm-hmm. Their job is precision, repeat, linear, structured, right? Those are two different mindsets. An executive with range is able to live in both of those environments and comfortably transition them, right? And understand them. So I think that's the other thing that takes, and if you find yourself being one or the other, get that complement. Get that complementary person on your team.
Right. We talked a little bit about networking, but how important is networking in entrepreneurial journey? And can you share some networking tips for job seekers looking to enter the entrepreneurial world?
Yeah, that's a good one because it depends on where you're starting from, right?
Right.
If you're buried off in what they would call an individual contributor role, you're probably going to be somewhat limited. Well, now your choices are, fortunately not with COVID anymore, but even with COVID, you could do some online stuff, is show up. 90% of life is showing up. And it's the same thing with networking. It's just showing up and going to things that maybe don't sound like they're that interesting. Some of them are duds. I mean, so networking event, you and two others, and you were expecting 30 or 40.
Right.
There's all the different networks that you have that you don't realize. They can be anywhere from, church networks to club networks to, all types of different ones. In the case of the individual contributor, they probably belonged or went to different conferences and things like that. Going back through those, especially in job transition, if you've been in a particular industry and you want to stay in that industry, that's a great place to look for who are all the other companies, because I
Right.
guarantee you, unless you were studying them from a competitive standpoint, you don't even know who they are.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree.
And then if you're willing to, adjust to new directions and do different things and go into different fields, then you kind of go at a broad industry level,
Right.
networking across the industry, or go into an
Shift.
entirely different industry. Go back to those skill sets and go, well, I've done this in tech. I can do that same thing in food.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the things. I mean, I've been in 5 different industries, but I tell them, it's all manufacturing, whether the widget's this big or the size of a 2-car garage. It's got a process, right? And it's got certain tools and experience and skills and so forth. So it's easily transferable. It's just being able to articulate that and how it goes into the job that you're looking for in the different industry. As an entrepreneur, and as I'm expecting that there's also failures and setbacks, how do you handle the failures and setbacks? And what advice would you have for job seekers who face rejection during job search and early stages of entrepreneurship?
Yeah.
Especially
Okay.
when I'm
Couple of
asking
things.
for money. Yeah, I'm gonna ask for money.
Yeah. I was just going to say that's, if you can't handle rejection, and you need money, don't go there.
Yeah,
You're going to make a lot of pitches. And even if you get interest, you have to match that with, it's very rarely that you will find an investment group that will take the whole round, that will take the whole bite.
right.
Even in a family and friends startup round, you're going to be going to a lot of people, and you'll get everything from the slow roll to the, oh gee, I forgot to write that check. But it isn't you. It's them. It's their situation, their perspective on things. The you part is your obligation to be honest, to be to exhibit that character, to be transparent, to speak truth to power. They've got the power. They got the gold.
Right.
And at the same time, be excited about what you're doing and try and show them and get them enthused and get them to see the picture that you see around that corner. And that's not always easy, because sometimes you're pitching to the wrong people. You're pitching to people that, yes, they have money, but they don't really have an interest in the space that you're trying to play in. And that's one thing I would say is don't waste a lot of time. If somebody says they're a venture capitalist or a seed round funder, and they ask you, what kind of traction do you have? They are neither. Right? They're basically a step below a mezzanine financier. They want assurances for their money. They're not really doing here's my idea, here's my team, here's my initial product, we need to go. So there's different levels of that money requirement. But if understanding who you're pitching to, whether or not they have an interest, make sure you speak truth to power, be as transparent as possible, but never give up on your vision and your passion. And just come back to that. It wasn't you, it was them. And in the sense of their perspective didn't match your perspective. Sometimes that's your communications issue, but likely it's, they just don't play there very well.
Right. Nope, agreed. Before we go, I want to ask a little bit more about your recent book, The Exponential Era. What drove you, or what convinced you that book needed to be read? And can you tell us a little bit more just about the outline of the book?
Well, what we realized is that what I'd said earlier in the show, that Moore's law was now starting to have its reflection in real life. That we had finally, hit that computational power point where the things could happen at that rate of change. And if they did start to do that, which we saw they were, what would happen? So again, we started to look around the corner. What were some of the bigger trends? What were the changes? What types of companies would survive it? What kind of companies wouldn't survive it? What sort of planning could you do to survive it? So that was what kind of drove us, was just, there's nothing out there.
Right.
You know, there's people writing about exponential technologies and isn't this cool, but it's like, but what are you going to do about it? How are you
Right.
going to adjust to it? How do you think about it? One of the things that we found in our research was that where we're struggling as a species is human beings. Everybody says, well, we only use 10% of our brain. Well, that's not really true. They were talking about from a conscious standpoint. Most of our brain is used to keep us alive.
Mm-hmm.
Tells our heart when to beat. I'm talking, it's been monitoring that. But at the same time, I'm visually aware of everything. I can hear everything. I know where my legs are, my feet are, my hands are. I know what's going outside and happening out there. I'm alert to all that. That's processing power, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a totally different thing. So when you ask the brain to go outside of that security piece, that, well, I'm just protecting you, dude. Got to watch out for those threats, take
Right.
advantage of different things. It has a tendency to take the future and go, it's not important. It's not here. It's what are you doing? Spending, precious caloric content, you're burning energy trying to get there. Why are you doing that? So we felt that we had to get it to where you could understand what a curve looks like, how it operates. And then sort of the biggest thing, and what I work on now is finding inflection points, which means you have different things coming together and they converge. When they converge, you get a transition. You get an entirely new ecosystem. Uber is a classic example of an entirely new ecosystem. If you look at, we go back to Craigslist.
Mm-hmm.
Craigslist singularly basically destroyed the newspaper classified ad business within 4 years. Right? It was an $80 billion shift in the newspaper business. So we felt there was a good enough examples out there to say you need to learn how to work with this. And since I had come from working with that law for most of my career, you learn some things, and part of them is counterintuitive. What I'd said earlier about the transition in wafer sizes as an example. Some of these things, if you take a look at an Amazon curve, right, it's really, and then it goes like this. You take a look at a Google curve, it goes like this. And so there's things called early signals and stuff like that. And we thought, well, people need to pay attention to that, because it's like, oh, AI is happening. Let's get into AI. You needed to be in AI 10 years ago,
Right.
5 years ago minimum.
Good. Well, Michael, I really appreciate you jumping on the show and sharing your experience and
Pleasure.
being connected with you and getting to know you better. How can people get a hold of you?
Real simple, michael.wright@interceptinghorizons.com.
And we'll share it in the comments on Facebook as well as YouTube. And then when we upload it, we'll make sure.
And then I'm on LinkedIn, of course. So, yeah.
Well, again, Michael, I really appreciate it. We'll wrap it up. We'll send you back in the studio. And again, thank you for your time and your insight.
Pleasure, George. Great questions, too. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Well, every show goes a lot faster than expected. But, if you know anybody that's in job search and you believe this show, not only this show, but the previous shows are all uploaded on our YouTube channel and our Facebook channel, as well as all the Spotify and all your favorite podcasts. You can go back and listen to them at your leisure. Either you're walking, running, whatever you do, you can pick those up. And this show will be uploaded by Saturday afternoon. If you, like I said, if you find this helpful and you know people that are in job search or contemplating a job search, and this can help, please share. Thanks to my award-winning and amazing, Amazon bestseller, my first book, Hire to Cut Your Career Search Time in Half. It is also the sponsor of this show too. So again, have a great week. You need help in job search, more than willing to help you out, and make it a great week.
get my